Three, two, one, and we're live. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Village Made podcast. My name is Moveo Hemuli, and man, today we got a special guest. And going back to what I was saying, referencing with Afa and Feli, these guys are OGs to my podcast. And so what I mean by OGs is the couple months, the 8 months that I did podcasting before I actually posted anything, these guys were the ones that I practiced on. And so now that we're moving on to bigger and better, it's a pleasure. I thank you again for spending another hour, half of your time, or 2 hours of your time
practicing.
And so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, let's just get straight into this. Can you tell the story of your names, who named you, and what your last name means?
Yeah. So I think I'll start with my last name it's Samani. It means salmon. So my great grandfather was his name was Vahai, and he had a lot of children. So the Vahai and there's a Sakona family and the Samani family, they're all the same family. But while there was the story goes that there was these, I think a priest and a nun, missionaries traveling from Scotland or somewhere, coming to Tonga to do missionary work, and they got lost. But somehow they saw these fish that helped guide them to Tonga and brought them over to Tonga, and they met Vahai, who was, I guess, the leader of that area. And Vahai ended up having a son, and these missionaries asked to raise that son, and they named him Samani for salmon, And I thought it was always confusing because it's like, man, I've never seen salmon in Tonga. Why is that our name? But it's because that was the fish they identified that helped them bring them to Tonga, and so they named him Samani. And then my first name is Ikani. Yeah, I don't even know what that means, but I'm named after my dad's cousin. His name was Ikani, and they were originally supposed to adopt me. My parents had two boys already when we were in Tonga, and that cousin, they had mostly girls, and I guess they had a boy, but he had passed away. And so my dad and my grandmother had made a deal to give me to them and adopt them. And I don't know if it's common. I think it happens fairly often in Tongan culture, right? In my family, we trade kids like Pokemon cards, so it happens a lot. But they had asked for me,
son,
for me, and so they named me after him, and I was supposed to be their child, but my mom just couldn't do it. I broke down, cried, and pled and prayed about it, and luckily I got to stay with the family and make it here to America.
Dang, that's crazy. So I guess you kind of mentioned it. Were you born and raised in Tonga too?
So I was like 1 or 2 when we left Tonga, and then we stopped in Hawaii for a little while, maybe a year, and then we moved to the States. My uncle had been doing well in the United States, and he had started migrating some of our family members over. So I came over when I was young. It was just 3 of us at that time. Yeah, so I'm an immigrant, but I'm also a U.S. citizen now. So don't call INS on me. I got my citizenship right after I got married. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that about you.
You didn't know that?
You're right. But in Tonga, what villages are your parents from?
So my dad is from Ta'anea, and my mom is from Lematua. I think when I was a kid, I remember we lived in Ta'anea. So that's what I remember, poor little village that we lived in.
Is this in Vava'u?
Yeah, in Vava'u, yeah, sorry.
That's cool. That's interesting. And can you, I guess, kind of go over, you kind of mentioned it already, talking about your uncle migrating your family or, different people. Can you talk about your specific family, I guess, in that migration and how they ended up in Utah?
Yeah, so my uncle had come over, I think 2 of my uncles had come over to the States already. And one of them, he was doing pretty well. I think he came over, went to BYU, Provo, I think got his MBA over there. And so he was able to sponsor us, and he had done well in the construction field, owning companies and building companies here. And so he sponsored my family, my mom and dad, and it was just me and my 2 older brothers at the time. So they brought us over, and then you have to work so long, right? Because it's hard as an immigrant. You need to earn money to try to get a green card. So it took years for us to get enough money to get our green cards. And then after we got our green cards, like you still need to save up to take a test. And after 9/11, like the prices to get to become a U.S. citizen and take the test got pretty expensive. I ended up going on a mission. I came back and I found out my whole family had got their citizenship and left me in the dust. So I had to go and get it on my own and raise the money and take the citizenship and become a U.S. Naturalized citizen after that.
Right.
So that's how we came here. My uncle brought us. And then when they brought us, there was a small community already in Provo of Tongans. There had been a few of them. And like Feli was part of, Feli's family was here. There was, most of them were we're all going to the same church, right? The same ward, the LDS ward. And so it was a nice little community to grow up in, because really it's a foreign country, foreign land. Like I didn't know English. Now I barely know Tongan, but at the time, like I didn't speak any English, and most of the kids, I think at that time, didn't speak English, but there was just a little group of these immigrants that live in South Provo at that time,
And so what was childhood like growing up for you in South Provo?
Man, it was cool because we would always hang out and do things together in our ward, our church. We focused a lot on the culture to try to bring that in. Like that's part of our identity, is like we had just moved from Tonga. That's what they knew. And so a lot of our, traditions, we still carried them over and try to help keep that culture alive. I don't know if they did it on purpose to keep the culture alive, but maybe just because that's all they knew.
Right.
So it was cool to see all the Polynesians, mostly Tongans at the time, all the Tongans spend a lot of time together. So it was really cool because as we all lived at different places. After a couple of years, everyone moved out of like South Provo and like Spanish Fork, moved up north a little bit. But it was cool to see as we grew up, like I would see the other Tongan kids that were different high schools, and like we were friends, and it was easy to get along and hang out. So it was an awesome community to grow up in and have that support. And we were always there because really that's because you're in a foreign country, like everything is foreign. Like you don't know, how businesses run, how things work, and so you rely on each other's experiences. And I felt that in the community, other members, other families who had been there a little bit earlier, always helping out the new families that just immigrated. So it was an awesome community to grow up in. And another part of that community, I think, sense of community I got was when I moved to Kahuku, right?
Yeah.
So I had to go to Kahuku because
talk about that experience, and then sorry before jumping in, but just talk about when you thought of, like, did you have an idea of what Koku was, or like your grandpa just or whoever told you to go to Koku, like, oh no, you're going Koku?
Yeah.
So did you have an idea of what it was before you got there, or you didn't? And then when you got there, did it meet your expectations or did it let you down?
Yeah.
And then talk about the community there when you were there.
So I knew of Kahuku because they had come to Provo, to Utah a couple times before, right? They had come like in 98 or something. What is it, 89? I don't remember what year it was. They had come and smashed Provo High. It's so bad that like I think the Provo High parents all like left them. They were supposed to like go feed them after and left them high and dry. So I like knew of Kahuku being like this football school. And so that's how I kind of knew of them. Just they would come to Utah every now and then. And then my brothers would go, they were older than my two older brothers. They would go to the University of Utah football camp. And somehow they always ended up on the Kahuku team, because no one from our high schools went up there really. And then when I went, I don't remember, like my junior year, I think I went there. And then that's where I met you and the team. So when we went, I don't know if you remember this, but we were like, it was like the very next day we woke up and Siwaki, the coach, he sat us down and he said like, hey, I had this dream. You're going to come play at Kahuku. And I was like, whoa. I was like, dude, you guys are a great team. And I would imagine, wouldn't mind, because I think Provo High, we'd only like won one game, maybe like 2 or 3 games the year before. And so when he said that, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. I get this opportunity to play with this great nationally ranked football team. And my dad was all gung-ho. He was like happy about it. He had gone to Hawaii a couple of times, so he already knew Siwake, and he knew had family members out there. So he said, yeah, you're going to go over there. And my auntie, I went to live with the Tupola. So Neha was a school teacher, right? And my mom thought like, oh, this is an opportunity because this guy is wasting his life not going to class, getting bad grades. And so she thought it was an opportunity for me to get in with a school teacher that could help discipline me and do well in school, right? And so that's what ended up happening is I went there and she was right. She disciplined me. I had to get my grades in line before I could do anything Friday nights. And so that's how I made it to Kahuku, is to live with my auntie and uncle, Neha Nuku Tupola, down there in Hawaii. And then I got to see the community there, right? Like it was nice because there was already like a Tongan community, and it was nice to kind of like get embraced just because I was Tongan and because our families, everyone knows what that similar feeling of being immigrants in a foreign country. And so it was nice to kind of get accepted. And we also had, similar beliefs as, going to the same church. So that was nice. And I feel like, man, I felt grateful because the group there accepted me in really quickly. And I was so surprised how friendly and nice everyone was in Hawaii. And that was another part of the community that kind of like blew my mind about, as far as like football country, right? Like I never thought like a Little Rock would have that type of football culture in the little tiny place. It was weird for me, to see people like at church on Sunday, like thank the football team for winning and bringing happiness to the community. But it was awesome too, because there's that sense of responsibility, right? When you build a tight-knit community, like you should be well-behaved. You should, perform as well as you can, but mind your manners and be kind to the elderly. And that's what that community built. So it was cool to see that, there's downsides to having small communities. Like everyone knows each other's business. Right. So that's just what it is. Like, hey, don't get in trouble because everyone's going to know about it, right? So, but yeah, I enjoyed my time. I love living in Kuku, and every time I go back to Hawaii, I always look for a job to work there. But it's hard to make a living out there unless you've been there for a while already. Yeah. Were you there junior and senior, or just junior? Just junior, and then into my senior year, we had come up to play Skyline. And I wasn't playing, and my parents they had been used to seeing me start football and do well, and so for them to not see me, they thought it was like, hey, we're sending you there to get your school up, but also to earn a scholarship, because they wanted me to go to BYU, and they didn't want to pay for school, and so when they saw me not playing that game, they thought like, well, just come, you can start any high school from here, so just come back. So as like I don't know, that was a pivotal moment for me. Like I had to choose whether or not I wanted to stay and work it out, but also I was like an arrogant high school kid, and I was like, I just want to start, and I can start anywhere. So I came back and finished that Pro Bowl. Yeah. At least you got a state champs, right? I know. Yeah, that's an experience, man. Tell me about that experience for you, I guess, Yeah, that's awesome. So there's part of the experience of getting the state championship is I got the experience. I came from a school that hadn't won a state championship since the 80s, and then come to Kahuku and see what it takes. And that's what kind of enlightened me to realize, like, man, to win a state championship, it takes really good habits like discipline, hard work, really good coaches that can teach you the skills, the things that matter, the whys of why you do certain things, and also to guide you through there. But I also learned about tradition in Kuku. Like when you have a winning, and it's the same thing, I guess, in St. Louis too. It's like when you have a winning tradition, that's something you have to live up to, right? And it's the same thing, I think, with our last names, right? It's Polynesians. Right. We have these names you need to live up to. So there's a certain expectation on how you should perform. And for seeing that, like, man, like this is the type of culture it takes to build. That's something I took with me for the rest of my life. Like, oh, if I want to work hard, if I want to achieve these certain goals, I need to discipline my life in this way. I need to figure out what it takes and not just go through the motions, but figure out what it takes to actually get there. And that's what I learned from there, from living in football country in Hawaii
Right.
and winning a state championship there. Yeah.
And I'm sure, I don't know if it's the same with in Provo, but like homecoming is totally different,
Oh
right?
man, that's just different. All that is different. Like, man, I love what, I don't know if all high schools do it in Hawaii, but Kahuku, like, man, it was the like Cheer Fest, Song Fest,
Right,
these
Cheer Fest.
activities that brings the community together. And I like that it brings your class, your individual
Yeah.
class group together, right? You do these activities and it solidifies your relationship with each other. And that for me, it was like, man, I never seen that before. And not really. And so like to see that as a tight-knit community of how they celebrate their culture and also celebrate unity and how they can build teamwork together. And that was awesome and eye-opening and super fun to do, right? Like, I think we went back one year. I came back to Hawaii and there was I don't know if it was a song fest, and somehow they didn't have enough people. So they asked the alumni to come. And I'm like, man, I didn't even graduate from here, but sure, I'll come and dance. And
Right.
it was super fun to just be a part of that experience. So I think that builds who you are as identity. Like, man, and if you meet someone that's from like Laia or from Kahuku or from Haula, just the North Shore, they have a real strong sense of like being from Hawaii, for being from the North Shore, being from Laia, being from Kahuku. And it's because of those things. And it's hard for people who haven't grown up in those. If you haven't experienced it, because there are experiences like, homecoming. I just asked this girl out, or she asked me, and I went to homecoming. Like homecoming in Kahuku was totally different. Like there is a whole community's there to see everyone dressed up and get, you know what I mean? Like
Even
it's
the lockers, decorating the lockers.
The way they decorate the lockers and the football game, like you better not lose that game, right? So
Right.
It's just a whole different experience, and it's hard for a lot of people. Like when I came back, like a lot of my friends and family from Utah, they're always hating on people from Hawaii, and I'm like, you just don't understand. You haven't been there. Sometimes it tease me like, oh, from Kuku, and I'm ready for life, and I'm like, you know what? Just something you don't know until you experience it, right? So, yeah, that's part of who I am. After experiencing like that identity, community building experience, that's something that sticks with you, and I think that's why so many people are proud to be from Hawaii and from the North Shore.
Yeah. And another thing too is everybody identifies as classes, class of 05 or class of 90 something.
Yeah.
But everybody else is like, why does that matter?
Well, yeah,
you know
why
what I
does
mean?
it
Like,
matter? Yeah.
why? I don't even know my own classmates. Why, but for us, that's how the bond that you're talking about is like, 05, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's us,
Yeah.
So I think that's another cool aspect of it. But going off of identity, can you talk about maybe experiences that you've had? I know you were born and raised in Tonga and then moving here and then trying to adapt to the American culture, maybe feeling too Tongan or maybe feeling not Tongan enough.
Yeah, so that's easy. When I was an immigrant, I only spoke Tongan. I felt super Tongan, And then as I progressing through the school system, like eventually, I don't know, like I still always understand Tongan because we go to church. It's always spoken there, and then the elders always spoken Tongan. So I've never not be able to understand Tongan, but I had to work really hard, try to understand American culture and how things, worked, because there's different from, what was working at home. Oddly enough though, the discipline that happens in Polynesian homes can be a little bit different, but I grew up really poor, and luckily for me, some of my Palangi friends, white friends who are poor, they grew up the same way. Their families disciplined them the same way. So we had that bond, but there's things that we did a little bit different. Like we had, Tongan traditions and cultural traditions that we follow, to be respectful, part of the manners that we teach. And sometimes the Palangi people didn't follow it. So it's like, oh man, you're talking back to your mom.
Right.
Like that's crazy.
I could never do that.
Yeah. And so that just different things like that. You have to, you just have to have two different perspectives, right? Like, oh, this is how we behave with our Tongan family. And then just understand that this is why they behave that way. They don't have they're not taught the same type of things that we're taught as Tongans and growing up. And so that as I adapted and grew, like, man, then I'd have my family or my friends who would come, new friends who would move from Tonga to the States. And like, then I felt like, man, I'm not Tongan enough. I don't know enough Tongan, but I think that did wear on me. Like every now and then, like some of the old men, I think later, when I was in high school, it's like, man, you should be able to speak Tongan. You should be ashamed of yourself like this. And I'm like, man, I can speak enough to get by and get food and survive if I was in Tonga. But like, it did kind of hurt me a little bit. Like, man, like, am I Tongan enough? But later on, as I accepted who I am and what I've become, I realized, like, man, no matter what, like, I am Tongan. I came from Tonga. That's part of my identity. Like, no matter what you say, they say, like, if I'm not a real Tongan, or I'm not a true Tongan because I don't follow these things. Like, it doesn't matter because that's part of my identity. Like, I've already accepted that. But it goes both ways, where sometimes people are just expressing their inadequacies to you. Like, maybe they don't feel like they don't know enough English, so they make fun of you because you don't know enough Tongan, or they put you down because they have their own, issues. But as I've become comfortable with who I am, where I'm at, like, just stop mattering to me. Like, I'm Tongan, that's part of my identity. My experiences built who I am and part of my life, and this is where I'm at now. Yeah.
And just going off of like the identity and stuff, it sounds like you are comfortable with who you are today. Yeah. Is it still an ongoing process, or do you feel like you've basically like solidified who you are?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty solidified in who I am, what I value, and I try to live my life according to those values. There's, sometimes I have different goals that I'm trying to achieve, and I have to check myself and realize, like, hey, do these things fit my values? Am I losing too much of myself? And so in the pursuit of like academics, I just finished I got my MBA. So shout out to the class of 2020, BYU EMBA program. But in that pursuit, like I only have so much time, only so many things that I can do. So would I like to learn Tongan so I can speak better? Yeah, it would be good. Like, eventually I would like to do that just so I can, have that ability again. But I'm still Tongan. But in the pursuit of what I'm doing right now, like, I have to put that in the back burner. Mm-hmm. That doesn't fulfill, what I'm trying to do and the values. And me as being a Tongan, that's part of my values. So it's already, I don't know if it's part of values, but it's part of me as my characteristics. But in the future, I hope to be able to learn Tongan right now. I just don't have the time to do everything I want to do, and I can't make everyone happy. But hopefully, I can make my wife happy. So, yep. Love you.
Shout out to the wifey. And because you have kids and you're like the gatekeeper of the culture. What are some of the cultural things, because you get to tell your kids, like, oh, I want to pass this on to them. I don't want to pass that on. What are maybe some of the things that you would like to pass on that you are passing on to your kids? Yeah,
one of the things, like, is just that sense of community. Yeah. So I want them to feel and know of what that means to grow up with a community that backs and cares for you. And so part of that just comes from our church, our little ward families, attending those functions that have, that the Tongan parts to it, and having my girls do taulongas, grow up doing dances. And just like we did, is we had to learn how to do dances in front and perform in front of family members. And that helps them to give them some identity too. But I want them to have those experiences. Like, it's funny because I think sometimes my kids forget. My wife is half Samoan, half Palang, half white, right? And my kids, I think, forget sometimes that they're half white and half Samoan, or part Samoan, part white, because we go to a Tongan ward, right? And so they're always doing Tongan things. And so it's been nice to see that as part of their identity. Like, my daughters are really proud to be Tongan. They throw up the tea. And I use my parents a lot because, they lived in Tonga and have all those cultural traditions, rich history and traditions that they want to share. So like my kids, I always ask my kids, I don't say always, but I ask my mom to introduce those things to them. And so it's funny because sometimes my daughter will stay at my parents' house, and they'll come back home and they'll start using Tongan words, and so it's funny to see them like mostly like chastise each other in Tongan, to see them, but it's part of those. I want them to know that that's part of their identity. Like no matter where they go, like you're Tongan. This is what it means to be Tongan, and I hope you know, especially in the Tongan culture, like religion, God is a huge part of that, and so that's the part of the things we want to instill into our girls. Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy. And it's probably a hard job doing that, you know what I mean? On top of teaching them to be, whatever else you want. But I guess going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with maybe with our younger selves, both me and you, or people thinking that, oh, that's the same person you are today, because that's what their last memory of you was. Yeah. And that's not who your identity is, right? But then just because of that, like, I don't know, even like when we get together with the boys, you always revert back to being childhood or childish again, or just like, the things that we used to do. But yeah, can you like talk about that? Yeah, just that identity, that it's not you, but it was who you were once upon a time.
Right? Like I can't go back and erase all the dumb things I did, right, with all my dumb friends that we did it with together, right? But it was fun at the time, and it's like the biggest thing is like I hadn't figured out who I was and what I wanted to do, and I didn't have purpose a lot of the times when I was just messing around. I think, and a lot of that happens in your teenage years,
trying to figure yourself out.
So if someone knew me when I was a teenager or even before that, then you might think I'm a little bit different now, just because I felt like you spend time afterwards learning who you are, learning what you're good at, what you can be good at, what skills you have, and also like trying to define what you want out of your life, or at least for me. And once I started defining those things, like I started changing like that. I had to give up things, to make sacrifices to be able to have a better life. If I wanted a better life, I had to make it for myself. It wasn't just going to happen, drinking kava all day. For me, it wasn't going to happen. So I needed to figure out what it would take to get there. And part of that was, spending time away from my friends. Like they're still my friends and I still see them, but I had to make that sacrifice. I know, like before I finished with my undergrad, I had to sell my Xbox. It was like getting down to the wire. And I'm like, man, I spent a lot of time playing games. I need to give this up. So, that's just what it is like once I decided, figuring out who I was, what I stand for, like I started solidifying who I was. So like maybe I still joke around with my friends, and like I was a pretty big jerk to all the younger kids, So sorry to my younger cousins who, I was a different person now. And I think that's this part of life is you grow and you learn and you try to be better, and then you try to help the people, that's coming up, to make better decisions, hopefully better decisions than you made.
Yeah, man, with the sacrifices that your parents made, to move to America, and the person that you are today, would you say that they'd be proud of who you are today?
Yeah, I think they are proud. Well, they've told me a couple of times, so yeah, nice. I know they're proud. Yeah, but it's nice to know that. It's also nice to have that accomplishment, because they would tell us all the time when we were kids, like, hey, like we're poor. We came to the United States for you guys to get an education. We wanted you to have a better life than us. Like we don't want you to work the type of jobs we're working. We want you to have a life. And for them, I just see, like I think at one point they probably thought like, man, this dude, my son's a loser.
This guy.
Yeah, like all he does is drink coffee all day with his buddies and try to hit on girls. Like this guy is not going anywhere. But when I found my purpose, or found that I wanted to have purpose in life, and I started seeking those things, I think that work for them paid off. I'm sure it was terrible seeing me through all my bad choices, but I think it paid off for them, because part of that is they told me why the reason I'm here, so that I could never deny that. Like that was always the back of my mind. Like, man, my parents made some pretty big sacrifices. My grandparents made some pretty big sacrifices for me to get here. Like I should do something about my life. And so we grew up super, super poor, and my parents, like, man, some of the friends that I hung around with, like, I didn't know what food stamps were, and they had these magical cards that you can go and swipe and get food, and I was like, holy crap, like, that's awesome. My parents, I don't know, they just didn't know about those programs, so we grew up poorer than the kids on welfare because we didn't have, the food stamp cards or anything. But that part of that solidified why I wanted to get out of poverty, is because, man, my parents came from Tonga, and we were in the U.S. We're living a poor life. We have this opportunity to pursue education or make your life better, and education is a great equalizer. So that was a better way for me to pursue. At least for me, people have different choices they make, right. But for me, education was a great equalizer. And when I took advantage of that, it's totally changed and blessed my life. And my parents, hopefully they're happy with my choices. Yeah.
That's amazing. And we like our generation or us, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right?
Right.
And so our parents are our giants, and so
yes.
Hopefully also continuing this legacy on, hopefully we continue to work that our ceiling becomes the next generation's floor, right? Yeah. So your kids are going to be farther ahead than you because of what you're doing right now, But yeah, man, I guess now we just transition or, move on from the first part of this into what you're doing today. And, kind of like just already in your, so, excuse me, in the stories that you've shared, just like there's always, there's never always going to be like, it's not always going to be roses, there's always going to be some kind of downfall. Yeah. And then just learning how to get over those things, And so just talk about what you're doing today with your job. Yeah. And then with the education, you kind of mentioned, getting your MBA. Yeah. And then, just telling us where you started with all that and how you got to where you are today a little bit. Yeah.
So like when I was a kid, I really liked computers, but I kind of went away with that when I...
Yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I was like a little nerd as a kid. I loved computers and stuff. And then like going into junior high, like my brothers were playing football, and it seemed like that's the manly thing to do, was play football. And like instead of spending time in the computer lab now, like I had to go to football practice. And so I just put that stuff away, but I'd still tinker around with technology. I was still a technology enthusiast. And then coming back from my after serving a mission in Seattle, I came back and I decided like, I'm going to go to school. I know how to study now. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to try to do, I don't want to be poor anymore. And so I
was that your dream job, I guess, at the time?
I just wanted to make...
Okay.
I just didn't want to be poor anymore,
So that was the job you thought was going to make you a lot of money?
Yeah, so I'm like, who makes a lot of money? And that's what everyone else says, doctors and lawyers. So let's do that. And then like I started doing the work, and I'm like, I'm good at some things and I'm bad at other things. Yeah. And then like listening to what you had to do as a career, I'm like, nope, that's not me. No. And I'm like, well, I kind of like business. I grew up kind of watching my dad try to run his business. And so I'm like, I'll study business. And then as I was studying it, like I realized I don't know what I'm going to do with this. Like, I don't feel confident enough to start my own business at this point. Like, I'm going to be a manager at like a fast food place. That's what I'm going to be. Like, I didn't feel like I could do anything with that degree. So I decided to talk to a counselor, and my brother and my wife had always said like, hey, you spend a ton of time playing with computers on your phone and stuff. You should go into technology. So luckily I had just enough credits to transfer over to computer science. There was a software engineering degree at UVU, and I'm like, I have enough Pell Grant money to pay for this degree. That's what I'm going to go into. And so I started studying it, and I loved it. I loved the programming part of it. I loved the technology part. It was super, it was difficult to learn some of the concepts that were hard, but felt really fulfilling mentally. Like I felt like, right. Oh man, this is what I want to do. And then I started realizing like, man, it's crazy the type of lifestyle you can have in the technology field. Like I didn't realize that that's how it was going to be. And I thought it was interesting. Like when I started looking for jobs out of college. Well, I was still in school, like, and it was interesting to see like the companies kind of vie for talent. It kind of reminded me of like recruiting trips in football. Like they would wine you and dine you, show off their facilities, and meet your team. And like it'd be the same thing for some of these coding jobs. They come show you their facility, come show you like all their free snacks and soda,
free beverages.
Yeah, come look at this is the video game. This is what we do and play. And I was like, man, this is crazy. I didn't know that thing existed. And so it was interesting. I ended up graduating, taking a job and studying engineering, software engineering. And so I've been working as a senior software engineer. I've worked on some side projects on the side. So I've helped people build little websites for themselves on the side. I think I still had that entrepreneurship bug. It's still in me. Eventually it grew in and I wanted to kind of do my own thing. So I was figuring out ways to do that. So I would build little websites for people, consulting businesses. And then I think after a while, I decided like, man, when I started Iconic Radio a couple of years ago, that's when it kind of, the entrepreneurship bug like really bit me. Like, man, this is exciting. I can build a product for people that they're going to love and enjoy. And I get to spend time trying to figure out how to keep it going, right? So as a young kid, like I think most Polynesians are creative people, right? Like as a young kid, I drew a lot and I loved drawing, and then work in building little things. So that's the really reason I love software is I get to build these cool software products for people, and I love seeing them use it and enjoy it. Right. What I didn't realize too is like, for me, also building a company where you have to put in effort, you have to do these different things to tweak it and tune it to get your company up and running and get the social media marketing and how you grow these things. Like, man, that's a creative process. You have to think creatively to get your business, going. And I didn't realize that I loved that business part of it until, I did Iconic Radio and I started to fall in love with it. And so I got invited to apply for an MBA, the executive MBA program at BYU.
With that, getting invited, was that something that was on your career path, or was that something that just came along and be like, oh, I'll take it?
Yeah, not really. It wasn't on my career path because for software engineers, and that master's degree doesn't do anything for you. Really, just if you go, it's usually to get a master's degree in computer science just to solidify your knowledge, or get a PhD and then go be a professor. But it didn't make much sense. Like there is no, for a lot of careers, if you get an MBA, it's a pay grade increase. For me as a software engineer, like you really paid off your knowledge that and that's skills you can learn outside of, formal school. So it didn't make much sense. So I was invited to join, come to these info sessions where we would go and they would say like, hey, you have to have this much years of experience. And I'm like, well, I don't have that. Like I'm a minority. That'll work. That I'm sure you guys are looking for diversity. I'll be that guy if you want. But it came down to that, and like I didn't feel like I was ready for an MBA. I always thought MBA was like, hey, I'm gonna get that like 10 years down the road. But I just went through these info sessions and they kept saying like, hey, just apply. And then if you apply and if you get in, awesome, consider it. If you don't, then hey. And for me, it's like, I didn't think I was going to get in. No. And I thought maybe it'll be a couple years on the road. And so when I got accepted, I was like, oh man, this is real. Like, do I want to do this? Like I have to commit, these resources. I have to financially commit to doing this. And my wife and I sat down and talked about it. Actually, when we got accepted, like I didn't tell anyone. My wife and I kept it quiet for a day or two. And then we went to the church the next day, and there was a sister there, an older sister. And my wife had told her like quietly, like, hey, she knew we were applying for the MBA program, and they told her like, hey, Ikani got in. And she was like, oh, did you tell everyone? Are you accepting it? And my wife was like, oh no. And she said something like, well, he should do it because this will give you the opportunity. You're going to learn and be able to serve more based on your education, the things that you do here. And so after that, like my wife told me, and I was like, I feel kind of guilty. I'm like, yeah, I think you're right. Like that's really my end goal. Like for me, one of my purposes in life is that I want to be able to serve people from my experience. And so if this gives me a better opportunity to be able to serve people in the future, then it's something worth pursuing.
Right.
So reluctantly, after we prayed about it, like, I guess we're doing this. So now I just finished my MBA.
Wow. And you grad when? Just this summer?
Yeah. So just
last
this summer.
month even maybe.
Yeah, my last class was in June. So yeah, we just barely finished. So it feels, with everything going on, it feels kind of different, but I'm glad to get a lot of my free nights home back.
Yeah. And going off of this, not only in MBA, but also in software, the work that you do, are there many Polynesians in there?
No, there's one kid, Sam Keller. He was half Tongan kid that was with me when we went to school. But really, there's hardly. So there's a lack of diversity in tech in general, minorities and women in general. There's just a big lack of it. They're looking for it. They realize now that they're lacking that perspective. You can't really build a product for women if you're a man, or a certain demographic if you don't have that empathy for that group, right? So I think they're looking for that. Let me take a drink. Is that
cool? You're good. But
there wasn't really any Polynesians in it, and I think it made it hard too. Is the mentality is a little bit different. A lot of the Western culture is usually like this competition, I think, which is good in some cases, but it's always this competition where you're fighting for these limited resources. You're to be the top person in your company, and in school too. Like I felt like in my computer science classes, like it was that same type of competition where like if you're winning, then I'm losing. So right. I need to do whatever, like not share this information for you. But there was a pretty good group of us that like were struggling with some of the courses, and we would make these study groups and come together. And it reminded me a lot of the Polynesian community. Like we work together, we figure things out, we share knowledge openly right. Because if you're successful, I can be successful too. It doesn't take away from the pie. We grow the pie yep. instead of just chipping away at it. And so I saw that mentality in contrast, this U.S. American culture of competition, but there's also a lot of people that recognize like we need this team building, we need to work together, and I've taken that part of that community is like you need to learn how to work together in teams. And I think later on in your career, like you need to be able to work with people, and if you can't. If you're too arrogant, it doesn't matter how much you know, man. Like no one's going to want to work with you. They're not going to want you on your team. And I'll gladly hire people who are humble and willing to learn and okay with making mistakes versus a dude that never apologizes. It always is right.
Thinks he knows it all.
Yeah, like it's not going to help us because we make mistakes. And in business in general, you make a ton of mistakes, and you got to be okay owning up to them and working together as a team with it.
Man, with you being in tech and also in the MBA, what do you think Polynesians can offer the tech world? Because you're, since you're the only one in there now, like for others, maybe the younger generation coming up that are wanting to be in the tech industry or the tech field, like, do you feel like we belong there, and do you feel like we can excel? Yeah,
I think we belong there for sure. There's a lot of things that we add. I think the ability to be able to work together cohesively as a team. You learn that in sports, but you also learn that in a community, growing up and relying on each other. So we sharing of information, because Polynesians always share information like, hey, this is how, there's a deal over here. This is how, this is how you get things done, just to help our community grow like that. We're already used to doing that. And I think great teams do the same thing. We share knowledge with each other. We don't hide those things. And also there's, I think Polynesians, mostly a lot of them are creative. And as far as like, there's a lot of design needed, artwork, things like that. Also designing the user experience, having a keen eye to like what looks nice, what looks fancy. I think Polynesians can have influence in those spaces, but also just like Polynesians in general are creative people. Like you have the ability to build what you want in software. Like that's pretty dope. And then also in the tech industry, like they compensate you pretty well. So you get to build dope stuff and have a good lifestyle. Like why wouldn't you want that? And so I think the lack of Polynesians and minorities and women in general is just they just don't know about it, right? Like I had no idea that software engineers have a good living, have a charmed lifestyle. I didn't know that they made, a certain amount of money that they made until like I got in the field and I had to go apply for jobs. I was like, holy cow, this is crazy. Like I didn't know out of college I can, have this type of living. And so I was grateful for that. And that's one of the reasons I try to help other Polynesians who are or want to get into tech or want to get into specifically into coding. Like, man, if they like coding, try it out. If they like coding, then it's something they should pursue because there's a great lifestyle after that, and you can build your own things. And there's so many different avenues that software and coding is really part of the future. It's being integrated into our school systems. And it's really just a way to think. And I think Polynesians can pick this up. Like if you look at our ancestors, like we're navigators, right? Like we were navigating the seas long before, other people were in these tiny little boats and crossing vast amounts of ocean and coming back. Like that's the intellectual strength that we have. Like you should be using that. Like it's nice that we're big and we're strong, but it's also nice that we have the mental fortitude to be able to do great things too.
Man, and that's why I wanted to have you on, is that there's not too many Polynesians like yourself, but for others, the younger generation coming up, they'll be like, oh, Ikani can do it. If he can, then I can,
Yeah, if he was a loser and he did it, then I can do this too, yeah.
Not in that way, but I'm just saying like, but yeah. I mean, it's easier when a person is relatable. He's brown or he's Tongan.
Oh, yeah.
So because I'm Tongan, I can do it. Or I'm Samoan. You know what I mean? Yeah. He's Polynesian, so I can do it because he's there,
Yeah.
And so for you to be like, like a trailblazer. I mean, not saying, whether you're the first or not, but there's not too many people working, not too many Polynesians working in that field. And so for you to be that person, people can look up to and be like, oh, he went to Koku.
Yeah.
If I went to Koku, I can do it now. Just kidding. No,
but really, I wish someone would have. I wish there was someone that I knew that would have helped me out because there's a lot of things like the resume for getting a tech job is not the same resume you apply for regular business jobs. And like my school, it wasn't even up to speed for that. Like I had to Google and figure out how to get a job. And I wish I would have been there was a Polynesian around that would, because I would have felt comfortable asking a Polynesian or someone that could have mentored me in those, in that aspect. And I think, but there is a couple. I think there's a guy named what's his name? Is it Jeff Mahe? He did the hymn apps on the iPhone. Oh. So a Tongan dude, and when I learned about him, like, hey, this guy released some apps. He was inspiration for me to release my own radio music app after. And so it's nice to know that there's Polynesians out there doing things. And so hopefully, and if there's anyone that needs help in, getting there, I'd love to help them out.
Dang, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And have you had ever... Just thinking about this in my mind, I kind of have an idea, but have you had this experience of walking into a room and be like, oh, I'm the whatever your job title is, and they'd be like, are you sure? Just because you're brown and big,
man.
Shouldn't you be playing football? Or did you play football? Have you ever gotten those experiences?
Yeah, I think some people think I should be in sales or because I'm...
you walk in and I'm the senior or whatever your job title.
It's funny when people find out I'm a software engineer because most of the time I dress down like really casual. And so it's funny that people don't realize like, oh yeah, software engineers, a lot of them just look like normal casual people. And for me... Yeah, I probably look like I should be doing some other profession, but I love coding. But it is funny because it's a funny profession. Like my wife we went to a company outing with one of the companies I work with, and she thought it was some bum on the street, like this Palangi dude. It looked like unkempt, just looked like he was wandering around the park that we were having our company little party at. And my wife was like, who's that guy? Yeah, my wife was like, and I was like, oh no, that's like our senior architect. He helps design all the software. And she was like, just blew her mind that dude who looked like he probably could be begging for money is the guy who is being compensated very well. So it's a great career to have because usually you don't have to dress up and impress anyone besides your colleagues.
Yeah, that's awesome. And speaking of in your job, when you're coming up in your job, was there ever a time that you that you maybe felt like quitting, or that you kind of like came on hard times and you're like, you know what, was there ever a breaking point and be like, I'm just might stop, or I just might quit or turn around and not move
Mostly
forward?
with just school, like when I
Okay.
was struggling to get through classes, like, man, like I need this schooling. This is like before these boot camps were available, like, or I just had no idea about them. And I had trouble like passing these classes where I felt like, oh, this is super hard. Like at one point, like I had to quit my part-time job and like take out loans, be like, I need to,
Full-time
yeah,
in
to do
school.
full-time focus on this because I really, really wanted to do that. But once I got into it, I learned the fundamentals and I learned how, to design really great systems. Then it became easy after that. Like it's just that hard fundamental part. It's computer science can be a tough subject to learn and grow into. But once you get into it, it's like, yeah, it's nice. It's a community that also helps each other out. Like there's a ton of information you find online. They get coding help. And so it's just that initial hump of learning it. And then once I got into my career, it's like, man, this is awesome. It's a great life. You can still see your family. If you want to see your family, you can. Or if you want to work your life off at a startup and slave away building code, you can do that too. But yeah, I think for me, just initially at the beginning, I think that's why I enjoy, and I hope more people get into it, because it was really hard at the beginning getting learning the fundamentals of computer science and then getting a job. But after that, it's like been cruise because it's a great life. Yeah.
Man, and I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, talking about mentors.
No.
Do you have a mentor, and is there a place for mentors, or like, is there a need for mentors?
I don't know if I have a specific mentor for computer science, for software engineering. I try to be a mentor for other people that want to, or to get a job in the field, but there was no one really that I reached out to. And so that's probably the reason I want to help other people out. And then as far as like mentoring goes, like I try to find mentors in fields or just ask questions all the time. When I was doing stuff outside of software engineering, like I was helping out with my parents' kava business, trying to help. I would ask people all the time. I was just a curious person to figure out, what do I need to do to help them perform well? How do I get this company up and going? So I look for mentors all the time. Like for us to succeed, right? Like we need to be able to help each other out. And I think as the tide rises, all the boats go up. So it's the same ideas, hopefully. And it's funny because the most like successful people, the people who are doing well, don't hoard information. They share it. They want to see you successful too, right? They've been there and they know about it. And so they share information, to be able to help other people out, at least figure out their path. So I've reached out to a ton of different people. I can't even name how many people I've reached out to and taken their advice and figure it out, when I was pitching ideas or trying to build my own app or build my own companies, always reaching out to people.
Man. And because you mentioned pitching ideas, just kind of going off of that, maybe what are some tips or some lessons that you've learned in pitching, and or some things that you know not to do when pitching? So I know some people may be asking, you know what I mean, that want to know because they're starting their own business or trying to look for investors or whatever they're doing,
So the biggest thing is like an idea. Everyone thinks like the idea is the goal. Their idea is like the golden $1 million idea. It's going to be like, no one has this idea. I need to hold on to this idea, and I'm not going to share with everyone, which is really bad. Like the person who actually executes on the idea is the person that's going to reap the rewards of that idea. There was, if you look at a lot of the industry, there's a lot of other companies doing similar things, right? Like Uber, and then Lyft came out, they're doing the same type of thing. But for you to be able to find your idea and execute on it, like you need to be able to share it. Like I've signed a ton of non-disclosure agreements with people so they can share their idea with me, but they get like super attached to the idea that this idea is going to make them a ton of money, and the idea hasn't done anything. Like they haven't done anything with the idea. Like you need to grow the idea into something. Like you need to validate your idea. The because business is all about serving a market. You're providing a product to a market, right? If there's no product market fit, no one's going to want your product, because even though you think it's the greatest thing, if no one wants to buy it,
there's no value,
one's going to, So even though the biggest thing that I learned is like, don't trust my own instincts, like trust the data, trust the validation. When I built Iconic Radio, like it was a play button on a website, and it had a survey saying like, do you want to hear more? So that was my idea of validating. Like I thought, hey, maybe people want a Polynesian radio station. And then I built that survey and the play button, and it played just a sample, like a 1 hour playlist of music of Polynesian artists. And like 100 people fill that out, within a day. And it just kept growing and growing. And so that's how I validated the idea, right? Yeah. So a lot of people will come up with ideas with no validation. Like, well, what have you done to validate that? Like, how do you know how much someone will pay for that? And they're like, no, you don't know. This idea is going to make you so rich. You're going to want to join me when you do it. I'm like, dude, I've heard this. I do this all the time,
right.
And I don't want to, put people out, but it's like, I've been there too. When I first learned how to do software coding, like I tried to build products too, and no one wanted them. So like I know that feeling too, to have your own ideas rejected. But for me, it's like, now I know, like there has to be some validation for it. If someone's not saying they want your product, then you're just wishful dreaming, and everyone wishes they had $1 million.
Man. So what advice would you give your younger self with what you know now?
What advice would I give my younger self? Go back to church and get right with God. Your life will be better, promise.
Just like Lewis, when Lewis was on the podcast, he said, "Oh, I'd go back and slap my younger self."
Yeah, figure it out earlier. You won't be wasting your life.
And then in the coding world, do you see in the next couple of years that diversity is going to change, or do you hope it is? I
think there's a big push for it. It's just hard because they push for it at the hiring stage. Like companies will say like, we want to hire diversity, we want women, and we want minorities, but really it has to be pushed down, and the people have to see it at a much earlier stage, like as kids, like their parents. These communities, these underserved communities, need to learn about these opportunities way before they even, get to school. They need to know that this is available for them. And so until that changes, then hopefully, like with you doing this podcast, with people seeing technology being integrated into the Polynesian community, I hope that people see like, oh yeah, there is a living you can make doing technology, because there's a huge need to have them in tech. And so I don't know if they give them preference because we're minority and women, but they give them preference. So get a job in tech, and it'll be rewarding for you.
Yeah, and also, there's a few people that I know that, went to those boot camps. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so now they're, hopefully working in the field. And so I see more and more coming out, Yeah. And I was just talking to, I don't know, Ross, I don't know. So when I talked to him, and he was like, yeah, Ikani was a person I looked at, because I knew he always worked in it. And so I don't know if he worked with you in a project or he tried to or something, but he's like, yeah, Ikani is the person I've always, looked up to. I was like, hey, that's cool that, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure not only he can look up to somebody, but you know what I mean? Like, there's also, for other people to relate to you.
Ross was, when he was releasing his app, his first
because he was trying to do that.
App, I reached out to him like, hey man, let me know if I can help you out, because I know the struggle. I've been there releasing an app, and you need the feedback to figure out how to get this thing. So I reached out to him, and I was happy. I was like, man, that's awesome that you're doing your coding, because I didn't know anyone else that was coding. So it's cool to see people pop up and at least give back to the community.
And shout out to Ross. He has a Sweepy app, coming out.
That's awesome.
Sweepy. So there's also Tali.
That's fine.
So he's trying to get into that too. But man. So with the success that you've had, what is your definition of success, and do you consider yourself successful?
So for me, my definition of success is if I'm living the life that I'm supposed to be living, the life that God, wants me to live. And part of that is like, am I serving my family? Am I fulfilling my obligations, to serve in my community and also to serve in church. And so I felt like there was times where I only worked like hourly jobs, and I felt like I was slaving away, and I knew I needed to get a different life if I wanted to expand my ability to serve, right? And so that's part of the reason I went into software engineering, is because I wanted to be able to have Sundays off, things like that. And I feel like if you know your values, what you stand for, if you're living right, then you're being successful. I don't think there's ever a point where you're like, oh, I made it, like you have to continue to live those values at some point. When I was going into my MBA class, one of the introductions they were saying is like, hey, a lot of people end up being really successful. You learn all these great skills for running a businesses, high level performing businesses, but you don't want to lose, at what expense are you getting your education at the cost of your family? And so for me, I'm being successful when I'm fulfilling my obligations to serve in all its capacities, the Lord, my family, and then my community, right? So for me, I feel like where I'm at right now is where I'm supposed to be, and so I feel good with where I'm at. I don't know if I can consider myself successful.
Dang, that's awesome. And also from what I heard from that, or what I take away from that is, there's successful people who aren't fulfilled, and there's successful people who are fulfilled,
Yeah.
And so for you to find your purpose and to be fulfilled in your purpose, I feel like that's where you're at. And, with the success you've had, I'm sure we're going to continue to see more success, right?
Hopefully I can reach my goals, That's a different topic.
Dang, that's cool. But man, I'm just grateful, for just all that you've talked about, just giving just this younger generation, or, the people that are coming up. And it doesn't even have to be younger generation. We can just make a 180 and, you know what I mean? Like at my age, just turn around and go into school again, or, go into coding school.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Camps, and then, just try to like keep up to date with everything, the technology that's happening. And I'm sure that,
if it's something you like, if for anyone out there that's listening, if it's something you like, if you do like computers and you have an affinity for coding, you can go to a free coding, like coding.com, and try it out and see if you like that problem solving, because that's part of it. Is you're solving problems all day that are mentally frustrating. And if you feel that reward for fulfilling these problems, then you might like coding. It might be a career worth pursuing.
Dang, that's cool. Well, now we'll get into, just some rapid fire questions. So the first thing that comes to mind, go ahead and answer them. What takes up too much of your time?
What takes up too much of my time? I try not to waste my time. Like there's time that I have for recreation, relaxing, watching like TV shows. So I try to stay pretty orderly with my time. So I don't want to say like I don't waste time, but I feel like I try to do a pretty good time making my time more efficient.
What do you wish you knew more about?
I wish I would have knew more about how to raise capital funding for business purposes.
What or who inspires you?
Who inspires me? That's a good question. I don't know if I've ever had, like, I don't have like an individual person that is inspiring, but anyone that's like overcoming their circumstances, their environment for them to do better. Like I love movies like that. I love people who have done that. So those type of people, those people who have overcome great hardships and achieved great goals, like that's super inspirational. That's part of the reason those are part of the things that inspire me.
What are some things you had to unlearn?
Oh man, I had to. Part of our community, we talk a lot about humility. Like we grow up learning how to be respectful, like keeping our mouth shut and listening to our elders. And it's one of those things I had to unlearn is like I need to share my insight and speak up and be assertive, at least in the business setting. Like there's a reason people brought you in is because they want your opinion. And so being assertive, I think the hot word for now is like radical candor, being able to speak with love to someone and openly about it. That's something I had to unlearn.
What's your favorite book?
Oh man, I read this science fiction book. when I was a sixth grade, called Ender's Game. I love that book. For me, it's a classic. I love it.
Yeah.
Read it over again.
What's special about the place you grew up?
The people. I think it's always the people that make things special. The memories, the bonds, the friends you have, the older kids you look up to. Those experiences are what make things special. Not particularly the home but the relationship and experiences that you have with people. For me, that's what makes it special.
What have you only recently formed an opinion about?
Gun safety and Second Amendment.
2A,
yep. Yeah. I'm got really excited about. I have enjoyed, guns and protecting my family, but I think recently I really got into that.
What's the luckiest thing that's happened to you?
Oh man, convincing my wife to marry me is probably the most luckiest thing. Like, she does so much for me, and she's different. Like, I married her for a reason, because she speaks up and gives back feedback. And sometimes I don't want to receive that feedback, but I come back and apologize. But she's been the best thing for my life. Yeah.
Amen. What song will guarantee to make you dance?
To make me the electric slide. Yeah.
Easy one. The church dances. Yeah. What are you most looking forward to in the next 10 years?
The next 10 years is, I have these goals. Like, I want to be able to be part of building a company, selling a company, and then investing in other Polynesian-backed ventures. And I hope I can do that within 10 years. So that's what I'm looking forward to doing. Yeah.
Nice. What could you give a 40-minute presentation on with no preparation?
Learning to code and code conventions and system designs.
What hobby would you get into if time and money weren't an issue?
Right now, into guns. So, like, if time and money was an issue, because guns can get kind of expensive. But I think that right now that's the hobby I'm into right now.
When people come to you for help, what do they usually need help with?
Usually with some technology related thing, fixing computers. I did some IT work prior to working in software engineering, and then like ideas for maybe help with their business, a little bit of consulting there.
What do you think everyone should do at least once in their life?
Learn to code.
Which of your scars has the best story behind it?
I don't know. I got kicked by one of my friends during football, and she opened up this gash in my leg, and it looks like this really bad burned scar. But it's from him cleating me, and that's
Was this in Coco or Provo?
Provo.
What helps you live in the moment?
My family, because I cannot be preoccupied with so many different things that are happening. And when I'm with my family, I'm not perfect at it, but I try to be present with my family.
Nice. And then last question, if you could give back to your village, how or what would you do?
Help people get jobs in tech, and then also to hopefully fund future Polynesian company ventures and ideas. So that's the long-term hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate the time, my man. I like, I just hope everyone that watched this, just learning that there is a coder, that is someone successful in coding, and that, we can also relate just because we're Polynesians. And so, as much as our bodies tell us to play football or, whatnot, but Ikani's, the circumstances that you came out of, when you were younger, you wanted to, kind of like mess around with computers and this kind of stuff. But because you had to play football, so you put that to the back burner. But if we could just go after these goals, as soon as we found out, or as soon as you know what they are, then how much farther along would you be now today?
Oh yeah, I know.
So. But yeah. Well, again, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Village Made podcast. From my village to yours, we'll see you later.